Ecclesiastes, page 651, verse 16 of chapter 3 is where we've got to. There is an outline on the bulletin. We won't be taking the fourth point of that tonight because I suddenly realized how appropriate it was for Charles Colson. Life at the top and what happens when you get stranded on the pinnacle of fame and power. So we'll leave that till next Sunday. We'll read down to verse 12 of chapter 4. In addition, I have also noticed that in this world you find wickedness where justice and right ought to be. I told myself God is going to judge the righteous and the evil alike, because every action will happen at its own set time. I concluded that God is testing us to show us that we are no better than animals. After all, the same fate awaits man and animal alike. One dies just like the other. They are both the same kind of creature. A human being is no better off than an animal because life has no meaning for either. They are both going to the same place, the dust. They both came from it. They will both go back to it. How can anyone be sure that a man's spirit goes upwards while an animal's spirit goes down into the ground? So I realized then that the best thing we can do is to enjoy what we have worked for. There is nothing else we can do. There is no way for us to know what will happen after we die. Then I looked again at all the injustice that goes on in this world. The oppressed were weeping, and no one would help them. No one would help them because their oppressors had power on their side. I envy those who are dead and gone. They are better off than those who are still alive. But better off than either are those who have never been born, who have never seen the injustice that goes on in this world. I have also learned why people work so hard to succeed. It is because they envy their neighbors. But it is useless. It is like chasing the wind. They say that a man would be a fool to fold his hands and let himself starve to death. Perhaps so. But it is better to have only a little with peace of mind than to be busy all the time with both hands trying to catch the wind. I have noticed something else in life that is useless. Here is a man who lives alone. He has no son, no brother, yet he's always working, never satisfied with the wealth he has. For whom is he working so hard and denying himself any pleasure? This is useless too, and a miserable way to live. Two are better off than one, because together they can work more effectively. If one of them falls down, the other can help him up. But if someone is alone and falls, it's just too bad, because there is no one to help him. If it is cold, two can sleep together and stay warm. But how can you keep warm by yourself? Two men can resist an attack that would defeat one man alone. A rope made of 3 cords is hard to break. O Father, take these words of your servant of many centuries ago, which yet seem still so true, and help us through them to understand more fully just what a blessing it is to live this side of Christ, to live Anno Domini in this year of grace, and to have a certainty of what lies beyond death, to be set free from the pessimism that comes from facing the facts, and to have the optimism that comes with the gift of faith. And so, Lord, help us to realize again just what life really is like without Jesus, of what a mess this world is in, that we're really no better than we were 3,000 years ago. But, Lord, thank you that Jesus is better. Better than Moses. Better than Solomon. Oh, better than anyone in the Old Testament, because he's your Son, our Savior. So may your Holy Spirit, who caused these words to be written and included in our Bibles, Help us to understand them and apply them in Jesus' name. Amen. From this point to the end of chapter 6 of the book of Ecclesiastes, we have pretty depressing reading. Here's a man who, with neither blinkers nor rose-colored spectacles, looks squarely at life as it really is. He is very observant. He looks at society and he writes it off. He says it is full of injustice. And unless you really close your eyes to the facts, you must agree with him that the world of today is no better than the world he describes here. You remember the words you heard last week from George Hoffman, how in Burma the government rationed issue of clothes is 1 shirt per family per year and 1 towel per family every 2 years. And Burma must surely be one of the poorest countries now in the world. Why should this be? Why should we be among the 15% who have 60% of the world's money in our pockets? It is so unfair. Indeed, as little children, one of the first phrases we learn when we begin to string words together is the phrase, "It isn't fair." Have you ever heard a child say that? They say nothing but that at a certain stage. It's not fair, it's not fair, it's not fair. And we have this deep sense of injustice from our very earliest years, and as we grow up and face life as it is, it grows. Have you noticed it always works upwards, never downwards? We always feel more keenly how unfair life is when we compare ourselves with those who are better off. It's very rare that we are as moved or as anxious to square the situation up with those who are worse off than ourselves. By nature, we look up and we envy those above us, and we say it's not fair. Injustice is even more difficult to bear when it appears in places where you would expect justice. I have sat in a court in a country I'm not going to name where bribery and corruption is the order of the day, even in the legal world. And I have just sat in a place where we expected justice and seen injustice in the very law courts of a land. And somehow it hurts more deeply, injustice, when it comes in the very place where it should be most clearly seen. Law courts that's one example. Government circles is another. Surely if a government is anything, it ought to stand for justice, social justice. And when injustice appears at the government level, it's more difficult to bear, because these are the people you look to equal things out, to make things fair and just. And a lot of injustice or sense of injustice lies behind political turmoil. And this is the scene on which the writer of this book looked when he said, "Everywhere I look, I see injustice. Life doesn't seem to be fair from beginning to end." And he noticed what you must have noticed, what Psalm 73 describes, that life does not work out in the way that good are rewarded and evil are punished. Life doesn't work out that way. Saints suffer and sinners escape. Many wicked people die in peace in their beds after spending money and time on themselves all their lives. And many really lovely people seem to just go through one traumatic buffeting after another as they pass through their earthly pilgrimage. And this deep sense of injustice, life doesn't fit our faith. We believe in a God who's good. We believe in a God who's loving. Then God, why does life work out so unjustly? Why do the innocent suffer and the guilty go scot-free? Why? Why can the train robber sell his life story for thousands of pounds, and any criminal of any repute, if I dare to use that somewhat enigmatic phrase, can know that he can sell his life story for £5,000 to the Sunday papers, which is the going price? Why? Just doesn't seem right or fair. And so this poor man struggling with this came to the conclusion that life was a jungle. It's very interesting that that word jungle is being increasingly used about human society. The two brothers, Desmond Morris and the better known, because he's on television, Johnny Morris, these two brothers have in their different ways, one seriously, one humorously, tried to show us the parallel between the animal and the human world again and again. Desmond Morris with his books like The Naked Ape and The Human Zoo, and Johnny Morris with his very whimsical tours of Regent's Park, in which he seems to see every one of us inside those cages. And so these people are saying more and more, we are in fact simply naked apes. That is not true. The human skin has more hair follicles, about 500,000, than any ape. So in fact we are hairy apes, not naked ones. But nevertheless, the parallel is being drawn all the time. And we get such phrases as the blackboard jungle applied to schools. We get phrases like the concrete jungle applied to our great metropolitan areas. Life is a jungle, and the law of the jungle seems to prevail. This was Charles Darwin's worst contribution to human thinking. There's an extraordinary trail from Charles Darwin's book, Origin of Species, right through to Nazi Germany, and to Russia and to China. And the trail lies through this word struggle. Charles Darwin virtually said man is simply an animal in the struggle for survival, the struggle for existence. And you can trace the word struggle through the philosophers like Nietzsche, through to a corporal from World War I writing a book in prison, Mein Kampf, My Struggle. And you can trace it right through from Charles Darwin to Karl Marx, who talked about the struggle between the proletariat and the rest. The struggle for existence. And this word struggle became almost the key word, and you can trace it right through into 20th century politics, science, philosophy. It is riddling our thought that life is simply a jungle, and therefore we just fight each other, and in the process many have to die. And the biggest fact of life in a jungle is that there is death occurring every minute, all the time. It's just one species preying on another. And the weakest go to the wall and the fittest survive. It was that theory, that outlook, which went straight from Darwin through Nietzsche to Hitler and plunged us into World War II. Let the fittest race survive, and let the weak go to the wall, and let the old and decrepit go to the euthanasia clinic, and let the Jews go to the gas chambers. This was the whole philosophy. And it does seem that life is like this. Millions die every decade through one form of injustice or another. Every day, even today on this Sunday, 10,000 people die of hunger. Seems so unfair, so unjust. And it goes on. And so the philosopher tries to grapple with this fact in relation to his belief in God. And he said, God, why do you let it happen? What are you trying to say? What are you trying to teach us? And he came to a very unusual conclusion. It is presented to us as his conclusion, not as God's answer to the question. But it's interesting to see his conclusion. He came to the conclusion that God let it happen to show us quite clearly that we are no better than animals. To bring us down from our pinnacles of pride and strip off the veneer of social development and strip away all the ideas of progress and show us that underneath we are beasts, we are brutes, and we treat each other worse than the apes treat each other. And as Richard Wurmbrand said from this very pulpit, to say that we are descended from the apes is an insult to the apes. No apes have done to each other what we human beings do to each other now in modern 20th century planet Earth. The cruelties we perpetuate. Don't think there's any experience quite so shattering as when I take the parties we take to Israel, to that museum of remembrance of World War II on Mount Herzl outside Jerusalem. It's all we can do to get people together into the bus after that, because somebody from the party is just wandering off almost in a state of shell shock. To see what men can do to little children, and the cruelty and unfairness of the world in which we live. God, we are just animals. And that was his conclusion. God, is that what you're saying to us in letting it all happen? Are you saying you're just animals to us? Well, God, you're right, because we we both come to death. And here he sees death as a reminder of our creatureliness. Oh, we think we're so big, we think we're so powerful, we think we're so great, and we all finish up in a little box 6 feet down. And in fact, if you look at the rotting corpse of a human and the rotting corpse of an animal, there is no scientific observation or evidence to show that anything different has happened between the two. They both come from dust, in that every particle of my body is the same as the chemicals to be found on the crust of the earth, and we both go right back there. And this body that I'm using tonight to speak to you will one day take its place again on the dust of the earth. So I finish up the same way my dog does. For all our greatness, for all our achievements, for all our human glory, the greatest finish dead, just like the animals do. And it is at this point that this man, writing within the framework which I described the first evening we approached Ecclesiastes, under the sun and within this life, within that framework he can see no evidence whatsoever that there's anything beyond the grave. And so he has to come to the conclusion that this is basically an unjust world, and that we must accept its injustice, and that the most we can make of that fact is, on the one hand, to see that God is teaching us that we're still animals in a jungle and no better, and on the other hand, that we're back to his advice of an earlier chapter: enjoy yourself while you can, for there is no way to know what will happen after we die. Now that's where the observant unbeliever must stand. I cannot see how the humanist can believe in justice in this world. I cannot see how the agnostic can believe that this is a moral universe, because the evidence is all to the contrary. And if I had no knowledge of anything beyond the grave, I think I would give up, and I would say, well, the most I can say is that God is simply leaving us in the jungle. But it is an unjust world. It is an unfair world, and there's nothing much we can do about it. Praise God, at the end of the sermon I'll be able to take you beyond the grave. The area where science cannot go, the area where the historian cannot go, the area where no one can go, the area beyond the grave lies beyond the powers of human discovery. Everything we know about life after death comes to us by divine revelation and not by human discovery. It is beyond our powers to penetrate that thick veil. And so if we cannot penetrate it in some way, if someone cannot tell us what lies beyond, if there is no hope beyond the grave of injustice being put right, of things being restored to their proper order, of the good being rewarded and the evil being punished, if there is no possibility of that beyond the grave, then I think I'd just give up. I couldn't live in such an unfair world if I knew that it was never going to get any better and could never be put right, for that's what is being said here. Now he then goes a little further and he says, not only is there corruption in the world and suffering, but he says also, I find cruelty and oppression. It's not just that some people go hungry, it's that other people seem in a crazy way to enjoy causing suffering. It's a world in which power goes to people's head, or as Lord Acton used to say, power tends to corrupt, and absolute power tends to corrupt absolutely. And the oppression in the world cannot be relieved because the power lies with the oppressor. And there's a vicious circle. If you have a rebellion and turn that oppressor out, what happens? Those who started the rebellion become in turn corrupted by the power and in turn oppress. If the Africans get Rhodesia, as most certainly they will, my greatest fear for them is that what they thought was oppression will be replaced by another form of oppression. And those who get power seem unable to handle it. And this is true of white and black, pink and grey, and every race of men on earth, that those in power can oppress others because they have the power. I think the most vivid memory I have of that is watching the newsreel of Hungary's attempt to be free from Russia. Do you remember that? Oh, the frustration as you saw men standing throwing stones at tanks. Why did we not go in? In 1939, we went in because Poland was being treated that way. Why did we not go into Hungary? I'll tell you why. Because Russia is powerful. That's why. Because the oppressor had the power, and all we could do was watch helplessly on television and say, "Tut, tut, isn't it dreadful?" and go back to our tea. And this man looked at all this, and he got to the lowest point in his feelings as he looks at life. In verses 2 and 3 of chapter 4, he touched rock bottom. When he looked at situations like Hungary, or on a local scale, on a lesser scale, how do you feel about these elderly women in London being mugged by young youths for their handbags? How do you feel about that? It's happening in England. The power is with the oppressor. And so on its own little scale, it's drawing ever nearer our world and our own experience. How do you feel about all this? Well, this man finally came to the conclusion, I envy those who are dead and gone. I envy them. And you know, if I wasn't a Christian, I think the world in which we are living today, and if all my reading each day was the newspaper only, I think I would envy those who are dead and gone. For I don't think it'll be long before we get to that stage. Say, oh, I wish I'd died in the 60s. What a world we're moving into. He goes even further than that, and he says, such a terrible world is the world that I observe. A world of oppression, a world of cruelty, that in fact those who've never been born are better off than those who are dead and gone because they've never even seen this world. And the best state, the most blessed state, is never to have opened your eyes on this scene at all. Now, can you sink lower than that? I don't think you can. The second lowest point of depression is to wish you were dead. The lowest point of all is to wish you'd never been born. Now, I'm sorry if you're finding this depressing, but the Bible knocks you down in order to pick you up. It humbles us in order to exalt us. It makes us face life as it is, in order that we may consider life as God meant it to be, and as God can indeed make it true. So this is the lowest point in the book of Ecclesiastes, and by the look on your faces, it's the low point in this series. I wish I were dead. I wish I'd never been born. I wish I never saw it. Now, the next thing he looks at is the rat race. He's still forcing us to look at life. So far, he's taken a kind of world picture, and injustice in the world is the most obvious fact that he's seen. And if you study our world at all, that's the most obvious fact that you see. The gap between the haves and the have-nots is widening daily. And it's so unfair. But now let's look more closely from the world of government and the world of oppression. Let's look at the world of commerce. Let's look at the world of the rat race. I find that phrase most significant. There are certain parts of the animal world where animals cooperate with each other. Have you ever watched ants? Isn't it fascinating to see how they cooperate together to do something? Or have you ever studied bees? That Fact and Faith film, City of the Bees. They've got workers going out to get the honey. They've got fanner bees at the doorway to the hive, keeping the air circulating. They've got the queen bee. Every bee is cooperating with the others to keep that hive going. But there are certain species in the animal world that do not cooperate, in which each individual is so concerned about itself that they will attack their own species, and such an animal is the rat. This is the origin of the phrase, the rat race. It's a picture of horrid, scurrying creatures, everyone concerned only for its own survival, and therefore prepared to jostle, to push, to attack, to bite, anything to survive, even to attack other rats. And therefore this phrase has come to be applied to that train full of commuters going up to London in the morning. It's an extraordinary phrase, the rat race. And the funny thing is, it's been a race that's been run for a very long time. And Ecclesiastes describes it perfectly. It is a world in which, first of all, there is competition, and then second, in which there is addiction to things. First, there's competition to get them. And once you're into the rat race, you become addicted to it so that you can't get off it even if you want to. Even after there's no more reason to be in it, you stay in it because you're hooked. Now let's look at what he says. He looks first at the spirit of competition, and he puts his finger exactly on the motive why people get into it. The motive, he says, is envy. The one thing none of us can really stand is being outclassed by someone else. It's the one feeling that keeps coming into our hearts. It's the most difficult one. It is one of the worst motives in history. It was responsible for the first murder of history. Cain killed Abel out of envy. It was responsible for the worst murder of history, because Pontius Pilate saw that for envy Jesus delivered him up. And Christians are not immune to this. There was a great saint in North Africa, and there's a legend about that saint, that demons tried to tempt him and they all failed. So the devil himself had to take the job over. And the devil went to speak to this saint and was back in hell within a minute. And the demon said, "Has he sinned?" And the devil said, "Of course he has. I know how to deal with saints." And they said, "Well, how did you do it? We tried everything on this man." And the devil said, "Well, I just whispered in his ear that his brother had been made Bishop of Alexandria." And envy smote his heart. We just do not like others to get ahead of us. It's called keeping up with the Joneses. It's phrased in many different ways. But there's a desire to have what others have, to be what others are, to do what others do. If the next door neighbor's going overseas for a holiday, then we must. If they get a new car, then we must. It's the rat race, and it's envy that puts us into it. It's essentially wanting something that someone else has that gets us into the race. It's the urge to get on and up. We'd rather depress another person in their fortune and bring them down to our level than rejoice with them at being up there. Now I wonder just how much of this motive lies behind pressure for higher wages, to be up with others, behind quarrels about wage differentials, always looking at someone who's got a bigger wage packet and saying, if they have it, why can't we? That is the rat race. And with rare discernment, Ecclesiastes says, the trouble is that the rat race produces the opposite by reaction. It produces the dropout. And he describes the lazy, indolent dropout who prides himself on not being in the rat race. And our society is dividing up into these two groups, the rats and the dropouts. And you can see it happening. And the dropout, says the Bible, folds his arms, and he is lazy and indolent. He says, I'm proud I'm not in the rat race. And he puts on a pair of jeans and he plays his guitar in the tube train, in the tube station. And he's proud that he's out of the rat race. He's a dropout. He's not working. He's a squatter in Stoke Road. That's what he is. He's living in a house free, not because he can't afford the rent, because he could work for it, but because he's proud that he's not in the rat race. He's dropped out. It's all described here. And in most vivid Hebrew, Ecclesiastes says, such a man is eating himself up. Laziness is suicide. It is cannibalism. And a man will destroy his own self-respect if he's no more than a dropout in the rat race. He chews himself up until he loses his grasp of reality. He loses his desire and ambition to achieve anything in life. And laziness is one of the easiest ways of getting out of the reach of God, because God is a very busy God. God is a worker. And when Jesus came, God said, my Father works until now, and now I work. And he told his followers, work while it is day. The night comes when no man can work. And a dropout loses the opportunity of finding in work the meaning of life. He tries to find it in leisure, and that's not where God has put it. God has put the meaning of your life in your work. And the dropout misses this. So between the man in the rat race working himself to death and the lazy dropout unworking himself to death, who's left? Well, says Ecclesiastes, there is a small group in the middle who are content, and here I give you the literal translation of the Hebrew, who are content with a handful of quietness. That's a lovely phrase. It means someone who's done a hard day's work, but is quite content with what he's got in his hand at the end of the day. Quite quiet about it. Instead, says Ecclesiastes, of the man who with both hands is grabbing everything he can in the rat race, and the dropout who's folded his arms and is doing nothing with his hands at all. The man who has done an honest day's work and is quietly content with what he's earned and has a handful of quietness, that man has discovered one of the secrets of life. There's a profound truth here. And these people are few and far between. I don't meet many people who have a handful of quietness at the end of the week. But I do meet some. What lovely people they are. They seem somehow to be right. They seem to have discovered what life's about. They're not grabbing with both hands, and they're not putting their hands in their pockets. They have worked with their hands for a handful of quietness. What a beautiful description. And I think that thought leads Ecclesiastes onto a very positive note. I come to point 3. Point number 1 was death in the jungle. Point number 2 was the rat race. Point number 3, partnership pays. As this man looks into this competitive society in which some grab and some drop out, he says, you know, the man who really gets there is the man who's learned to cooperate rather than to compete. The man who's discovered that 2 can do more than 1. The man who's discovered that 3 are better than 2. It's a simple observation and a profound one. He's not talking about marriage, though I've used this at marriage services, and I'm quite sure you've heard it referred to marriage. But he says, take some simple examples of where you've got cooperation rather than competition, togetherness rather than the loneliness of the man in the rat race, or the loneliness of the dropout. Both are lonely people. Both are people who somehow lose their friends, even their families. The man in the rat race suddenly wakes up to find he's estranged from his wife and family and has drifted away from them. The dropout suddenly realizes he has no colleagues, no real friends. Even those he mixed with are no longer there. But the man with the handful of quietness is the man who seems to get along with people, to regard them not as rival rats, but as friends, as colleagues. Take first of all cooperation between 2. 2 are better than 1. It's not just that 1 plus 1 equals 2, it's 1 plus 1 equals 5. Somehow 2 people can do together what 2 separately cannot do. They don't add one person's effort to another, they multiply it. There is something about 2 people doing something together that multiplies their effectiveness. Here are 3 examples. Number 1, they multiply their effectiveness in work. 2 people tackling a job together can do it better than 1 can. I remember on the farm how unrewarding it was to plant potatoes the hard way by yourself. Have any of you ever done that? You hang a sack round your neck and you bend your back at right angles and you cut 2 slits in either side of the sack with a knife. And then bending your back, you go along the road. Alternately, you put your hand in and bring a potato out and drop them at intervals of about 9 inches to 12 inches in a furrow. Believe me, when you're doing that by yourself, you keep straightening up and you keep getting so tired you just can't go on. But if 2 of you are there, you just keep going and you seem somehow to get you back down, and 5 o'clock comes and then you straighten up. 2 work far more effectively than 1. Another example of cooperation is this. If 2 of you are together, 1 falls, the other can help. Imagine mountaineering. 2 individuals are climbing a mountain by themselves, alone. 1 falls, there's nothing you can do. How do you climb a mountain? Why, you rope 2 together. And then if 1 does fall, the other can hold, take up the slack, rescue that man immediately. And you'll get to the top of a mountain much more effectively in a team roped together, even with 1 other rope to you, than if you tackle it by yourself. Far safer. And then this lovely illustration of 2 in a bed. And aunt of mine has a favorite phrase, like 2 spoons in a drawer. It's most descriptive, that phrase. And it's not of marriage, though it is certainly true in that sphere. You really need to see men in a tough situation to see this. Take, for example, Arctic explorers. You see them settle down for the night, and you will see them as close together as possible. Or in the desert, you see the Bedou in Arabia. The desert night is so cold, there can be keen frost from the burning heat of the day. And the Bedous, when they settle down at night, they really get as close to each other as they can, and thus reduce the area of heat loss of their bodies. Or do you remember that plane crash, that one that hit the headlines when they were reduced to eating the flesh of some of those who died? Do you remember that plane crash in the Andes? Apart from the flesh that they ate, which caused all the controversy, the main factor in their staying alive was the fact that they got so close together, they managed just to keep each other warm enough. You see, right through life you can see that competition kills, but cooperation brings life. Why is it then that we seem to be such a competitive society, and so little cooperation seems to occur in industry, commerce, or what have you? Why can't we get it together? Why can't management workers sit down around the table and cooperate instead of competing in a them and us fashion? This is at the heart of the problem of life's injustices. If only we could cooperate instead of being competitive, then the injustices could be dealt with. Do you see the line of thinking here? Then finally he caps it by saying, and 3 are better than 2. I drove over the Severn Bridge recently, and I looked again at that magnificent structure. I find it a fascinating piece of engineering. And in particular, the 2 great wire ropes that go up over those concrete columns. And when you look closely at those wire ropes, they are made up of tiny individual strands. And if you watch that being built, you know that there was a spinning wheel, went up and over, back again, over again, back again, over again, time and time again, like a spider weaving a web, but laying each time one more strand, and it was being twisted in and together into one rope. And that wire rope can now hold all the traffic going to Wales. It's made up of individual strands together. And says Ecclesiastes, even 3 strands twisted together you'll find very hard to break. And 3 people really held together in a partnership, in a team, in a colleagueship, twisted together in love, you'll find that very hard to break. 2 are 10 times better than 1, but 3, 10 times better than 2. And so we've exhausted perhaps the passage. Let me now with joy come to the New Testament. We've been looking so far as any humanist might look at our society, and we've come to one very simple conclusion. What we need is a world in which there is cooperation rather than competition, in which people work together instead of for themselves. Isn't that, in a nutshell, what this world needs? Could it be put more simply than that? And I want to tell you first the bad news, then the good news. The bad news is quite simple. There is no hope of our world becoming a cooperative world. It will remain competitive until it disappears. That's the bad news. I have no hope of the humanist dream of a united human race removing injustice from the earth. I have no hope of that, whatever. That's the bad news. The New Testament makes it quite clear that the human race will never become the 2-fold and the 3-fold cord. But now for the good news. Within the human race, God has planted His Son, and His Son is starting a new humanity, a new race, a new man. And this new humanity, his characteristics will be precisely cooperation instead of competition, liberation instead of oppression, contentment instead of covetousness, and above all, togetherness instead of loneliness. And He is doing this right now before your very eyes, because if you look round this building, you are looking at people who are part of this new humanity. And people who, with all the growing pains, with all the tensions that belong to their old humanity, are nevertheless being formed into a cooperative body, into cords that cannot be broken, into a united family in which injustice is removed. And it's being done as individuals become partners with Christ. The first twosome that is needed is for a man or a woman to get together with Jesus. And something begins to happen when those two get together. When the man or woman falls, Jesus picks them up. They work so effectively together. And then two become three, three become four. And the most unlikely people who in other circumstances would have been competitive find themselves members of one body and cooperating to do something lovely for God. And a beautiful people is being formed. Now, I'm not unreal in this. I know the church as well as anybody, this and other churches, warts and all. I know myself, you see, and I know all the problems, and I know the growing pains. And yet to me the exciting thing is that I see for the first time a society on earth that is not only dedicated to these ideals, but is beginning to achieve them. A society in which black and white can love each other. A society in which that conference can take place in Nairobi in December of this year, when black and white will get together to plead with God to show them how they can together show Africa that black and white are both his children. I see a society in which Chuck Colson can get on his knees and pray with a man who was at the very opposite end of the political spectrum to himself and find a brotherhood willing to go to prison for it. I see a society in which it is not a matter of competition, in which if one rejoices, all rejoice. If one is honored, all are honored. And if one suffers, all suffer. I see a society that is piercing through the Iron Curtain and the Bamboo Curtain, bringing East and West into one family. I see a society in which people are being liberated from their hang-ups and set free to be themselves and accepted as themselves. I see a society that is not a jungle but a garden. And I see all that coming to be in Christ. And therefore I say with Ecclesiastes, the dead are better off. For me to die is gain. Not because you're out of it, but because you're further into it. A Christian never says, I wish I'd never been born, but a Christian does say, I long to depart and be with Christ. Because he knows that you are not confined to live within that narrow box under the sun and this side of the grave. The Christian has discovered that it is God's plan to scrap this world. He's going to have an almighty Guy Fawkes one day, an almighty bonfire, and he's just going to burn the whole thing up and blow it up. And out of the ashes will rise like a phoenix, a new heaven and a new earth, in which righteousness and peace kiss each other, in which good dwells, in which people live together in harmony, in which the rat race and the dropouts are things of the past, and in which we shall together serve him day and night in his temple. What a vision. I pity the writer of Ecclesiastes that he was born at the wrong time. Before he knew all this, before he could know it all. There are just hints in the Old Testament of all this. But now we know that that thing which is most characteristic of the animals, death, has been conquered. And now we see man a little lower than the angels. Not like the animals, but like the angels. And we even see a new universe in which man will be above the angels. And these human beings, capable of being such brutes and beasts to each other, become sons of God in glory. Or if I hadn't this hope, I couldn't face the world as it is. I'd have to live in the self-delusion of the humanist who believes that it's all getting better. But as I read Ecclesiastes, it says to me loud and clear, the world is no better in 1976 than it was in the year that he wrote that book. What is better is Jesus, and the living hope to which we've been born anew by his resurrection from the dead, and his promise to make us new creatures, to blend us together until we have all things in common, until we love one another as he loved us, until we see that rivalry and competition has no place within the new humanity, until we see that injustice can be dealt with, but only when it's dealt with by love rather than might. That's my vision. That's my dream. Like Martin Luther King, I have a dream. Only it's a dream that's going to come true. It's not a fantasy. It is an act of faith. It flies in the face of facts. This world as I see it is an unjust world and will never be any better. But into it has come a new world. Already the kingdom has begun, and already even its social effects are seen. And already Christians are proclaiming the kingdom of God. It has arrived. You may enter it. You may live. You may be melted and molded into this one new humanity in Christ Jesus. And then you know that it's warmer to be together, much warmer. And that if you fall, you'll be picked up. And that we can work so effectively as we go out. Notice that the Lord Jesus always sent out 2 by 2. Did you notice that? But in fact they were 3, because he was with them. And a threefold cord cannot be snapped. Praise God then for this vision. We've ploughed through some dismal scenery, and now the thunderclouds have lifted and the sun is shining in this beautiful country ahead. Lovely country, and it's all been made possible by the death and resurrection of our Lord Jesus Christ. Let us pray. Father, every one of us still has much of the old man in us to be dealt with and to be taken away. The rivalry, the competition, the cruelty, the oppression, the lust for power. Lord, take it away. Lord, thank you that you can set us free from the rat race without making us dropouts. Thank you for a handful of quietness. Thank you for the new humanity. Oh, Lord Jesus Christ, what a wonderful idea to make a new people for a new world. How did you think of it? Thank you for revealing this secret to us, so that we've not been left in despair, so that we can face the facts and be honest about the injustice, but not lose our hope, not despair. We thank you then, Lord Jesus, that you are making us one in the Spirit. We are family. We are one.